I never thought my life would change with a single phone call. At that time, I was exhausted, broke, and barely holding myself together. My days were a cycle of cheap coffee, long shifts, and the constant fear of being thrown out of my tiny apartment. Then came the offer, strange, unbelievable, and almost insulting. Someone wanted to pay me to date a billionaire, a woman everyone described as impossible, cold, and cruel. At first, I laughed at it. Who would even think of something like that? But when I heard the amount of money, my laughter turned into silence. It was more than I had ever seen in my account. Enough to pay rent, enough to breathe, enough to live without the constant weight of worry. Still, the idea scared me. Dating someone not because of love, but because of a contract? It felt wrong, like selling a part of myself. And then they told me her name. The billionaire with a reputation darker than her tailored suits. People called her grumpy, heartless, untouchable. Someone who destroyed anyone foolish enough to get too close. They warned me she wasn't looking for romance. She just needed someone to stand beside her. Someone who wouldn't run away. I should have walked away. I should have said no. But something inside me whispered to try, even if it meant stepping into a world where I didn't belong. That was the beginning of everything. The night I agreed to be paid to date a grumpy billionaire. I remember the night the offer came to me. The world felt unbearably heavy on my shoulders, and I had reached a point where even breathing seemed like a task. My apartment was falling apart, leaky pipes, peeling paint, and a landlord who reminded me every other day that rent was due. My bank account had dipped so low that even buying bread felt like a luxury, and I was behind on bills I couldn't dare to open. My job wasn't enough. It never was. I was tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones and convinces you that maybe life will never get better. I wanted to dream, to live freely, to love, but those things felt like luxuries reserved for people who didn't have to count pennies to survive. That night, the phone call came. A man I barely knew told me he had a proposition. His words were calm, deliberate, and filled with a strange kind of certainty. He said he represented someone powerful, someone rich beyond imagination, someone who lived in a world so far removed from mine that it almost felt like fiction. His client was looking for something unusual, not a business deal, not a friend, not an employee in the usual sense. She was looking for a date she was willing to pay for. At first, I thought it was a sick joke, another scam targeting desperate people. I even laughed, though it came out hollow and cracked. But the man didn't waver. He spoke of contracts, of terms, of money I could never dream of. The number he offered stunned me into silence. It wasn't just enough to pay rent. It was enough to wipe away my debt, to buy myself time, to live like a human being instead of a machine just grinding for survival. The temptation was instant, sharp, and almost shameful. My pride screamed at me to hang up, to say I wasn't someone who could be bought. But another voice, quieter but heavier, whispered, "When was pride ever going to pay your rent?" I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening as he explained that this woman, this billionaire, didn't want love. She didn't want commitment. She didn't even want passion. She just needed someone to be by her side, someone who wouldn't betray her, someone who would play the part without asking questions. And the most important part of his warning was the way he described her. Difficult, impatient, cold. "She is not easy to be around," he said in a tone that was both cautious and apologetic. "She has driven away everyone else. Don't expect her to be warm. She doesn't trust easily and she won't trust you. She is grumpy, to put it lightly." I imagined her then, some powerful figure in a sharp suit, sitting behind a desk made of glass, her face stern and unreadable, her eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. I pictured her life, expensive, controlled, lonely. What kind of woman needed to pay someone just to be by her side? What kind of heartache made someone that guarded? The thought made me curious, and that curiosity scared me. The man assured me I didn't need to worry about the details yet. I only had to agree to meet her once. A simple introduction. No promises, no contracts until I saw her with my own eyes. I hesitated. My heart pounded so loud it felt like the sound was filling the room. Every logical part of me screamed no. But the truth was undeniable. I needed the money. I needed a chance to breathe. And maybe, deep down, I needed something to shake me out of the dull, lifeless routine I had been trapped in. So I said yes. My voice trembled, but the word left my mouth. Yes. After that, everything moved quickly. A car would come for me the next evening. I was told to dress well, though nothing too extravagant. She doesn't like people trying too hard, the man warned. That detail stuck with me. For some reason, it made her sound more human, less of an untouchable figure and more like a woman who simply didn't want to be lied to. I spent that entire night restless, pacing around my tiny apartment. I pulled clothes from my closet, throwing them onto the bed, hating each one. Nothing I owned felt worthy enough for a billionaire's gaze. I imagined her judging me, her sharp eyes noticing every wrinkle, every flaw. I told myself not to care, that this was just a job, nothing more, but my heart didn't believe my brain. There was a strange heaviness inside me, like I was walking into something that would change me, even though I didn't know how. Morning came with no sleep, just a stomach full of nerves. I drank bitter coffee and forced myself to eat a slice of toast, though it tasted like paper. I stood in front of the mirror for too long, practicing smiles that didn't look as nervous as I felt. For hours, I questioned if I was making the biggest mistake of my life, but the thought of the money kept me from backing out. Evening arrived, and with it, the car. A sleek, black vehicle waited outside my building, so out of place against the cracked sidewalks and broken street lamps of my neighborhood. The driver didn't smile when I climbed in. He didn't speak either, only nodded once and started the engine. I pressed my palms together, sweating despite the chill in the air, and watched the city blur by. With every passing streetlight, I felt myself being carried further from the world I knew, into something darker, richer, and far more dangerous. I kept asking myself what I had agreed to, who this woman truly was, and what would happen when our eyes met for the first time. That was the night I took the first step into her world. The night I agreed to be paid to date a grumpy billionaire. The car ride felt endless, yet my heart pounded as though it couldn't wait another second. The city lights slipped past in streaks of gold and white, reflections bouncing across the tinted glass, and I wondered if she was already waiting for me, already regretting this arrangement before it even began. My palms were slick with sweat, and I kept smoothing them down over the fabric of my dress, wishing I could hide the nervous tremble in my hands. Every second dragged me closer to her world, a world I didn't belong in, a world that seemed too polished for someone like me, someone with worn-out shoes and a bank account constantly threatening to collapse. I told myself over and over again that this was just a meeting, just one night, and if it went badly, I could still walk away. But there was something inside me, some quiet voice that whispered, "This is the beginning of something you won't be able to run from." The car finally slowed, and when I looked out the window, my breath caught in my throat. Her home, or maybe palace, rose before me like something out of a dream. Tall gates, sharp and commanding, opened silently to let us through. The driveway seemed endless, lined with perfect trees and lit with soft golden lamps, the kind of detail that spoke of someone who never had to worry about cost or effort. When the car stopped in front of the massive entrance, I felt small, like a child stumbling into a place where she didn't belong. The driver didn't look at me as he opened the door, and my legs felt like they weighed bricks as I stepped out into the cold air. The doors opened before I even reached them, and a woman in a tailored uniform greeted me with a professional smile. She didn't ask my name. She already knew it. "She's waiting in the lounge," the woman said softly, gesturing for me to follow. I nodded, unable to form words, and stepped inside. The interior was breathtaking in a way that made me want to cry. Everything was flawless, marble floors that gleamed under the soft lighting, walls hung with art that looked too rare to even breathe near, furniture arranged so carefully it seemed untouched. I felt like one wrong move would shatter the perfection of it all. As I walked, the sound of my footsteps echoed faintly, and I kept wishing I could disappear into the shadows. This wasn't my world. I didn't deserve to even be here. But my nerves were silenced the moment I stepped into the lounge and saw her for the first time. She was sitting near the window, framed by the glow of the city lights behind her. Her posture was sharp, commanding, her presence filling the room with an intensity one couldn't explain. She wore a black suit, perfectly tailored, the kind of clothing that looked like it was made to remind everyone of her power. Her legs were crossed, her hand resting loosely against the armrest, and when her eyes lifted to meet mine, I felt the air leave my lungs. They were cold, impossibly cold, but piercing, like she could see right through me in a single glance. Her expression didn't shift, not even slightly. No smile, no warmth, only sharp observation. "You're late," she said finally, her voice low and smooth, but carrying an edge that cut straight into me. I stammered, trying to explain that the car had arrived on time, but she lifted one hand, silencing me instantly. "Excuses are boring," she said. "Sit." The word wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. My body moved before my brain caught up, and I sat in the chair across from her, stiff and unsure what to do with my hands. For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere behind me, and I realized she wasn't looking at me like a person. She was studying me, analyzing me as though I were a product she was deciding whether to buy. Finally, she spoke again. "Do you know why you're here?" The question made my throat dry, and I nodded carefully. "Yes, to accompany you." Her eyes narrowed, and I thought she might laugh at how clumsy my words sounded. But instead, she leaned back in her chair, tilting her head slightly as though trying to decide if I was worth her time. "You don't look like the type who belongs here," she said, her voice steady, almost bored. The words stung, even though I knew they were true. I didn't belong here. I didn't belong in her mansion, in her world, in her presence. My dress felt cheap under her gaze, my skin prickling as though every flaw had been dragged into the light. I tried to answer, but my tongue felt heavy, so I said the only thing I could. "I don't." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, something unreadable crossing them before disappearing. She leaned forward then, resting her elbows on her knees, her hands clasped loosely together. "Then why are you here?" The honesty slipped out before I could stop it. "Because I need the money." I expected her to mock me, to dismiss me, to tell me I wasn't worth her time. But instead, she sat back again, and something in her lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something close to it. "At least you're honest," she said softly, almost to herself. That moment lingered in the air between us. I didn't know what it meant or why it seemed to matter, but the sharpness in her eyes softened by the smallest fraction. She asked me a few more questions then, not personal ones, but practical. My schedule, my ability to travel, whether I had the patience to handle being by her side. Her words carried no affection, no warmth, but her presence was magnetic in a way I couldn't understand. She intimidated me, yet I couldn't look away. She was everything I had imagined, grumpy, cold, impossible. And yet there was something in the air, some faint flicker of curiosity, like maybe she didn't hate that I was sitting in front of her. When the meeting ended, she rose gracefully, taller than I expected, her figure commanding and elegant. She didn't shake my hand, didn't thank me. She only said, "The driver will take you home. You'll hear from me if I decide to keep you." It wasn't kindness. It wasn't even interest. But as I followed the woman in the uniform back through the hallways, my heart wouldn't stop racing. I had been judged, measured, and left hanging in the balance. Yet, instead of relief that it was over, I felt something else, something restless, dangerous, and far too curious. I told myself it was only the money. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. The next few days were a blur of restless thoughts and questions I couldn't answer. I kept replaying every moment of that first meeting in my mind. Her cold stare, her sharp words, the way her presence seemed to silence the air around her. I told myself it was just a job, that if she called me again, I would accept without hesitation because the money was too good to ignore. But beneath that practical reasoning was a gnawing curiosity I couldn't shake. I wanted to know more about her. I wanted to understand why someone with everything the world could offer still looked so lonely, so untouchable. I tried to push those thoughts away, but they returned again and again, growing stronger with each passing hour. When the call finally came, my heart lurched so hard I almost dropped the phone. The voice on the other end simply said, "She wants to see you again. Tomorrow evening. Be ready at 6. No explanation, no details. Just an order, and then the line went dead. I spent the entire night awake, nerves buzzing in my veins, wondering what she had seen in me that made her decide to keep me around. By morning, I had convinced myself she would send me away after the second meeting, that she had only called me back to make it clear I wasn't enough. But part of me, the part one hated admitting existed, hoped she had felt something, some tiny flicker of connection, even if it was only curiosity. When the black car came again, I felt the same wave of dread and wonder wash over me. The driver was silent, the ride smooth, and once again I found myself stepping into her mansion, a world so far removed from mine it might as well have been a different planet. This time, she wasn't waiting in the lounge. I was led to a dining room with ceilings so high I felt like I was walking into a cathedral. She was already seated at the far end of a long polished table, a glass of red wine resting near her hand. Her gaze lifted when I entered, pinning me in place like a butterfly caught in glass. "You came," she said simply, her voice carrying no warmth, yet it wasn't as cutting as before. I nodded, unsure what else to do, and took the seat offered to me by the uniformed woman who seemed to hover at her command. The food was served, dishes so delicate and expensive I barely recognized them. My hand shook slightly as I picked up the silverware, too aware of her eyes on me, studying my every move. For several minutes, we ate in silence, the clink of cutlery echoing through the massive room. I felt like I was on trial, every gesture a test I didn't understand. Finally, she spoke. "You don't talk much." The words startled me, and I nearly dropped my fork. I forced a small laugh, awkward and nervous. I just don't know what to say to someone like you." Her brow arched, and for the first time I thought I saw the faintest curve of amusement at the corner of her lips. "Someone like me?" she asked, leaning back in her chair, her glass turning slowly between her fingers. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her question. Powerful, important, intimidating. The word slipped out before I could stop it, and for a moment I thought she would dismiss me with the same coldness as before. But instead, she held my gaze steadily, and something in her eyes shifted, the sharpness softening for just a fraction of a second. "Intimidating," she repeated, almost like she was testing the taste of the word. She set her glass down with deliberate calm, her eyes still on me. "Good. Fear keeps people honest." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, though inside I felt a pang of sadness. Was that what her life had become? Surrounded by people who feared her, who never dared to be real. Maybe that was why she had to pay someone like me, to strip away the lies and get something raw, unpolished, unafraid. I didn't dare ask her, but the thought clung to me as we continued the meal. Later that evening, we found ourselves in one of her private lounges, a smaller, more intimate space than the vast rooms I had seen before. Books lined the walls, soft music hummed in the background, and for the first time, the atmosphere didn't feel like it was suffocating me. She poured herself another glass of wine and sat across from me, her posture as controlled as always, yet there was something different in her eyes, something tired, something fragile that I hadn't noticed before. Out of nowhere, she asked me, "Why did you really say yes?" Her voice was quieter than usual, almost cautious. I hesitated, my hands curling in my lap. The truth pressed against my lips, heavy and undeniable. Because I needed the money, I admitted, my voice small. She studied me for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a short nod, almost approving. At least you don't pretend, she murmured. Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It felt different, like we were sitting on the edge of something unspoken. I found myself staring at her hands, at the way she held her glass with such precision, at the faint scars on her knuckles, as though she had lived a life far more violent than her polished world suggested. My curiosity burned hotter. I wanted to ask about her life, about the stories buried behind her grumpy facade, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I simply watched her, and for the first time, I thought I saw loneliness flicker in her eyes. When the night ended, she dismissed me with the same clipped words as before, but this time there was no sharp edge to them. You'll hear from me, she said, standing tall, her figure silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. As I walked back to the car, my chest ached with emotions I couldn't name. I told myself it was just the strangeness of her world, the way it pulled me in and unsettled me. But deep down, I knew it was her. Something about her, cold and grumpy and impossibly guarded, had hooked itself into me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be free. The third meeting came faster than I expected. I thought she might take her time, leave me hanging on the edge of doubt. But only 2 days passed before the call came again. She requests your presence, the voice on the phone said, as though it wasn't a choice at all but an order written in stone. I didn't even try to say no. My body agreed before my mind could catch up, and once again, I found myself preparing in the same small apartment, pulling clothes from the closet that never felt enough for her world. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, staring at myself, trying to understand why she kept calling me back. I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't rich. I wasn't someone who belonged in her life. Yet, she wanted me there. That fact alone kept my stomach tied in knots of both fear and anticipation. This time, when the car stopped in front of her mansion, I wasn't led to the dining room or the lounge. Instead, the woman in uniform guided me down a hallway I hadn't seen before. The air felt different here, quieter, more private, like a place reserved only for the pieces of her she didn't show to the world. The room I entered was a library, vast and elegant, but alive with warmth. Tall shelves reached toward the ceiling, overflowing with books. A soft fire glowed in the hearth, casting a golden hue across the room, and a grand piano sat silently near the window. She was there, sitting in an armchair with a book in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes found mine instantly, sharp but softer than before, as if she had been expecting me. "You're on time," she said, her voice still cool, but lacking the sting of judgment. I smiled nervously, unsure how to respond, and she gestured toward the seat across from her. "Sit." I hate shouting across the room. I obeyed, lowering myself into the chair, my eyes drifting over the endless rows of books. I couldn't stop myself from whispering, "It's beautiful in here." For the first time, her expression shifted, not into a smile exactly, but into something gentler, something almost nostalgic. "It's the only room in this house that feels like mine," she admitted quietly, closing the book in her lap. That confession startled me. I glanced around the polished wood, the shelves filled with stories, the faint smell of old paper and ink. It was easy to forget the cold perfection of the rest of the mansion while sitting here. "Do you read all of them?" I asked before I could stop myself. She arched a brow, her lips curving into a faint smirk. "What kind of person buys books just to let them collect dust?" Her answer was sharp, but there was a playful undertone, a spark of life I hadn't seen before. Something in me softened, and I leaned forward slightly. "What's your favorite?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment I worried I had pushed too far. But then she tilted her head, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "There isn't just one," she said, her voice quieter now. "But I like stories where people are forced to show who they really are, where the masks fall away." Her gaze locked onto mine with those words, and my breath caught in my throat. It felt like she was speaking about herself, not the books. She held my stare for a long moment before looking away, her composure slipping back into place like armor. The night unfolded differently from the others. There was no formal dinner, no cold distance. Instead, we shared wine by the fire, the flames casting shadows across her face, softening the edges that always seemed so sharp. She asked me questions, not many, but enough to make me feel like she wanted to know me, not just keep me around. I told her about the bookstore I used to visit as a child, about the way I would sit on the floor between the shelves because we couldn't afford to buy the books. She listened, silent but attentive, her eyes never leaving mine. For the first time, I felt like she wasn't just studying me, she was seeing me. As the hours passed, the conversation grew lighter. At one point, I made a clumsy joke about how out of place I felt in her mansion, and to my shock, she actually laughed. It was short, quiet, almost reluctant, but it was real. The sound sent warmth rushing through me, and I found myself smiling, wanting desperately to hear it again. I realized then that behind all her grumpiness and guarded words, there was someone who could laugh, someone who could feel, someone who might be hiding because the world had been too cruel to her. When she rose from her chair to pour us more wine, I caught myself watching her more closely than before. The graceful way she moved, the strength in her posture, the way the firelight traced the lines of her face. My chest tightened, a dangerous warmth building inside me. I reminded myself that this was a job, that money was the only reason I was here, but the thought felt weak and hollow. The truth was harder to ignore with every passing second. I was drawn to her, pulled in by something deeper than I could explain. As the night grew late, she surprised me again by opening up about her past. Not much, just fragments, a childhood spent in strict households, betrayals from people she once trusted, the weight of a family name that demanded perfection. Her voice didn't waver, but I could feel the tension beneath her words, like scars she carried in silence. I wanted to reach out, to tell her she didn't have to be alone in that pain, but I stayed still, afraid of breaking the fragile moment between us. When it was finally time to leave, she didn't dismiss me with the same coldness as before. Instead, she walked me to the door herself, her expression unreadable, but her eyes lingering on me just a second longer than necessary. "You'll come back," she said, not as a question, but as a statement, as though she already knew the answer. I nodded, my throat tight, and stepped into the waiting car. The ride home was filled with silence, but inside me, everything was loud. My heart raced, my thoughts tangled, my emotions pulling in directions I didn't want to admit. I told myself again that this was about money, about survival, about a deal I had made. But as I sat there in the darkness, the image of her sitting by the fire, the sound of her reluctant laugh, the glimpse of vulnerability in her eyes replayed over and over in my mind. And for the first time I realized I was in danger, not from her temper, not from her power, but from the truth growing quietly inside me. I was falling for her, slowly, helplessly, and I didn't know how to stop. The days leading up to the next meeting were unbearable. I tried to distract myself with ordinary routines, grocery shopping, cleaning my apartment, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, but nothing worked. My thoughts always drifted back to her. I remembered the sound of her laugh, faint but real, the way her eyes had softened when she spoke about her past, the warmth of the firelight reflecting against her face in that library that felt more alive than the rest of her house. I told myself again and again that I couldn't let myself get carried away, that this was still an arrangement built on money, on necessity, not on love. But no matter how many times I repeated those words in my head, my heart refused to listen. Something in me had already shifted, and I couldn't undo it. When the call came again, I didn't hesitate. I agreed instantly, my voice steadier than before, though my chest was pounding. This time, the car didn't take me to her mansion. Instead, the driver explained we were meeting her at one of her private offices in the city. The building was a towering glass structure, sleek and intimidating, reaching so high it seemed to slice into the clouds. My throat tightened as I stepped inside, the lobby filled with polished stone and men in sharp suits, moving with purpose. I felt small, out of place, like an intruder in a world built for people far more powerful than me. Yet when I entered the private elevator and it carried me upward in silence, a strange calmness began to spread through me. I wasn't just here for the money anymore. I wanted to see her, to feel that magnetic pull again, even if it tore me apart later. When the elevator doors slid open, she was waiting. She stood near the wide windows of her office, the city sprawling out below her in endless lights and movement. She looked different here, still powerful, still guarded, but sharper somehow, more like the version of herself the world saw, the version she used to keep everything and everyone at a distance. Yet when her eyes found me, something flickered in them, brief, fleeting, but there. She gestured for me to come closer, her lips pressing into a faint line. "I had a long day," she said simply, her voice carrying exhaustion beneath its strength. I nodded, not knowing how to respond, but I followed her gesture toward a seating area near her desk. She poured herself a glass of something amber and strong, and after a pause, she poured one for me too. I hesitated, the burn hitting my throat instantly, but I didn't complain. She sank into the seat across from me, her posture still perfect, her face unreadable, but her eyes lingered longer than before, traveling across my face like she was searching for something she hadn't decided whether to like or hate. The silence stretched between us, heavier than the others we'd shared. I tried to fill it, to say something light, something that might ease the tension. "You look tired," I murmured, then immediately regretted it, fearing she would snap at me for daring to say such a thing. But instead, she let out a quiet sigh, setting her glass down with care. "I am," she admitted. The honesty surprised me. For a moment, I forgot the carefully constructed walls she always carried, and I saw her as just a woman, exhausted, burdened, lonely. We talked more that night than we ever had before. Slowly, carefully, she let pieces of herself slip into the conversation. She told me about the empire she managed, about the endless responsibilities, about how trust had become a luxury she couldn't afford. She spoke of betrayals, not in detail, but enough to paint a picture of scars carved deep into her. Her voice never cracked, but I could feel the weight of every word. I listened, my heart aching, wanting so badly to tell her she didn't have to carry it all alone. But I knew she wasn't ready to hear that, not yet. The longer we spoke, the closer I felt to her. And yet, the guilt grew heavier inside me. Every time she opened up, every time her eyes softened just a little, I felt like a thief stealing something that wasn't mine to take. Because she didn't know the truth. She didn't know that this all started with money, with a contract, with me agreeing to be paid to stand at her side. And the deeper I fell for her, the more that secret burned inside me like a poison. I wanted to confess, to tell her everything, but the fear of losing her silenced me. If she knew, she would send me away without hesitation, and I couldn't bear the thought of never seeing her again. As the night went on, I noticed her watching me differently. Her gaze lingered on me longer than it should have. Her voice softened when she said my name. Her body leaned just a fraction closer when she spoke. There was a moment, fleeting but undeniable, when her hand brushed against mine as she reached for her glass. The touch was light, accidental perhaps, but it sent a rush of heat through me, and I saw the same flicker in her eyes before she pulled away. It was in that moment I realized she felt it too. The pull, the dangerous thread tying us together. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the elevator herself. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, the city lights shining behind her, painting her like some untouchable figure carved from shadow and fire. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. Instead, she spoke first. "You're different," she said softly, almost reluctantly, as though admitting it against her will. My heart hammered in my chest, and I whispered back, "So are you?" The elevator doors opened then, and the moment was gone. I stepped inside, my body trembling with emotions I couldn't control, and as the doors closed between us, I caught one last glimpse of her face, still guarded, still unreadable, but with something new in her eyes. Something dangerous, something fragile. That night, lying awake in my small bed, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I wasn't just falling for her. I had already fallen, and there was no way back. But the secret of how it all began hung over me like a storm, threatening to destroy everything before it could even truly begin. It happened the way storms always do. Quiet at first, then sudden, brutal, and impossible to stop. For weeks, I had been walking on the edge of something fragile, balancing between the truth and the lie, falling deeper into her world while clinging to the secret that chained me. I told myself I would confess before it went too far, that she deserved honesty, that the risk of losing her was still better than betraying her. But every time I opened my mouth, the words refused to come. I couldn't destroy the fragile connection growing between us. I couldn't shatter the look in her eyes when they softened, or the way her voice gentled when she spoke to me. I was selfish, I knew that, but I was desperate to keep her, even if it meant building something on a foundation that could never last. The night everything fell apart began, like so many others. She had invited me to a private dinner, not at her mansion this time, but at a quiet restaurant she had closed off entirely for us. It was intimate, almost romantic, with dim lighting and soft music, and for once she seemed less like the grumpy billionaire who ruled everything and more like a woman who wanted company. We talked about books, about little things that made her laugh, and the distance between us felt smaller than ever before. When her hand brushed mine across the table, she didn't pull away this time. Her fingers lingered, her eyes locked onto mine, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this could become real. But reality has a cruel way of arriving exactly when it hurts most. It was during dessert when she excused herself briefly, leaving me at the table with the silence of the empty restaurant pressing in. That was when a man approached me. I didn't recognize him, but the way he smirked made my stomach twist. He leaned against the table, his voice low and mocking. "So you're the one she's paying for now," he sneered. My blood ran cold. I froze, unable to speak, but he didn't stop. "She always does this, you know. Find someone to play her little games. How much are they giving you to keep her company?" My throat burned as shame surged through me. I tried to tell him to leave, to shut him out, but before I could, she returned. She stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing as they flicked between us. The man straightened, his grin widening. "Oh, she didn't tell you," he said, looking at her now. "Your little date here confessed everything. She's in it for the money. Nothing more." The silence that followed was deafening. Her eyes snapped to me, sharp, piercing, colder than I had ever seen them. "Is that true?" she asked, her voice low, but shaking with something that felt like fire beneath ice. My chest constricted. The truth spilled out, clumsy and desperate. "It started that way, yes, but it's not." She cut me off with a raised hand, her lips pressed so tightly together they had turned pale. "Enough." I tried again, my voice breaking. "Please listen. It began with money, but I never expected to." The words tangled in my throat, and I couldn't finish. She stood there, her body rigid, her eyes filled with fury and betrayal. "You think I don't know what people want from me?" she spat, her voice trembling now, not from weakness, but from the force of her anger. "Do you think you're the first? Do you think I haven't seen this 1,000 times? All of you pretending to care, pretending to be different, but in the end it's always the same. Always about what I can give, never about who I am." Tears blurred my vision. I shook my head violently, my hands reaching toward her across the table. "No, that's not what this is anymore. It started that way, but it changed. You changed it. I love." My words faltered under the weight of her stare. Her face was stone, but her eyes betrayed something darker. Pain, the kind that comes from wounds reopened too many times. She took a step back, her shoulders squared as if bracing herself against a blow. "Don't," she said, her voice cutting and final. "Don't you dare say those words. Not to me. Not now." I tried to stand to go after her, but she turned before I could move, her heels striking the floor with sharp, deliberate steps. The door slammed behind her, the echo ringing in my ears like a final judgment. I collapsed back into my chair, shaking, my chest hollow and burning. The man who had exposed me was gone, vanished into the night, leaving only the wreckage of what he had destroyed. The car ride home was unbearable. For the first time, I wasn't escorted back with quiet dignity. The driver said nothing, but his silence felt different now, heavier, as though he too knew I was finished. When I stepped into my apartment, the walls closed in on me. Everything felt smaller, darker, emptier. I sank onto the floor, my head in my hands, the weight of what I had lost crushing me. She would never forgive me. She would never believe that my feelings had become real. For days I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment between us, every smile, every laugh, every look that had lingered too long. I saw the way her walls had started to lower, the way her voice had softened when she told me pieces of her past, and I hated myself for not telling her the truth sooner. I had destroyed the fragile trust she had dared to give me, and I knew there was no way back. And yet, even in the depths of my despair, I couldn't stop loving her. That was the cruelest part of all. Even as I sat alone in the dark, choking on regret, my heart still belonged to her. The grumpy billionaire who had unknowingly stolen me piece by piece until I had nothing left to give. The silence was the cruelest part. Days turned into weeks, and there was nothing but emptiness where she had once been. No calls, no messages, no sudden invitations in the night. The world I had briefly touched, the glittering world of her power and her secrets, vanished as though I had never been a part of it at all. I checked my phone obsessively, waiting for her name to appear on the screen, even though I knew it wouldn't. Every time I heard footsteps outside my door, I imagined it was her driver, come to collect me again, but the sound always faded into nothing. I told myself to let go, to accept that she was gone, that I had destroyed the fragile thing we'd begun to build, but my heart refused to listen. Every corner of my apartment reminded me of her. Every quiet moment dragged me back into memories of the way she had looked at me, the way her walls had started to crumble when she let me close. Now all of it felt like a cruel dream I could never return to. At first, I thought anger would come, that I would turn against her for not letting me explain, for condemning me so quickly. But the anger never came. Instead, there was only guilt, a heavy, relentless guilt that followed me everywhere. I thought about all the moments when I could have told her the truth, when I could have confessed that the arrangement had started with money but had turned into something real. But I had stayed silent, too afraid of losing her. And now that fear had become reality, the silence I had tried to avoid had swallowed me whole. Nights were the worst. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last time I had seen her. Her voice cutting through me like a blade, her eyes filled with betrayal. The way she had turned away without looking back. I wondered if she thought of me at all, or if I had already been erased from her life, filed away as just another mistake, another person who had proven her right about the world. I wanted to believe that she still felt something, that the moments we had shared meant as much to her as they had to me, but doubt gnawed at me until I could hardly breathe. I tried to move on. I threw myself into small routines, going for walks, working extra hours, visiting friends who asked too many questions. I smiled when they pressed me about what had been wrong, but the smile never reached my eyes. I couldn't tell them. How could I explain that I had fallen in love with someone untouchable, someone who lived in a world so far from mine that we had only collided because of money? How could I explain that I had betrayed her before I even knew her, and that by the time I wanted to make it right, it was already too late? The shame kept me quiet, locked inside my own isolation. One evening, desperate for distraction, I wandered into a bookstore I hadn't visited in years. I thought maybe a story could pull me away from my own misery, but instead it reminded me of her. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about books, the gentleness in her voice when she told me how they had been her only companions as a lonely child in a house too big for one soul. Standing in the quiet aisles, I felt the ache of missing her sharper than ever. I ran my fingers over the spines of novels I knew she would love, and the tears came before I could stop them. I pressed my hand to my mouth to muffle the sound, terrified someone would see me breaking apart over a woman who no longer wanted me in her life. Nights blurred together, and my loneliness deepened. I found myself writing letters I never sent, pouring out everything I wished I could say to her. I told her how sorry I was, how much she meant to me, how the money had stopped matching the moment I realized I was falling for her. I filled pages with confessions, with promises, with the raw truth I had been too afraid to speak when I had the chance. When I finished, I tore them all up. She would never believe me now. She would think it was just another lie, another performance meant to trick her into lowering her guard again. But as much as I hated myself, as much as I drowned in regret, I couldn't let go of the hope. It was fragile, foolish even, but it kept me breathing. Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to believe she still thought of me too, that she couldn't erase me completely no matter how much she tried. I imagined her sitting alone in her mansion, surrounded by her wealth and power, but feeling that same hollowness that haunted me. I imagined her remembering the nights when she had let her guard down, when she had laughed with me, when her hand had lingered on mine just a little too long. The city moved on around me. People laughed in cafes, rushed through streets, lived their lives without the weight of my secret. And yet I felt frozen in time, suspended in the moment when she walked away. Every sound of the world felt distant, muffled, meaningless. My world had been her, and without her, everything else had turned gray. I told myself it was over, that there was no coming back from this. And still, every morning when I woke up, the first thought that came to me was her face, her voice, her touch. No matter how hard I tried to bury it, the love I felt for her only grew stronger in her absence. It was a cruel, endless ache, when I didn't know how to survive. And then, when I had nearly convinced myself she was gone forever, something shifted. A message, a sign, small, almost nothing, but enough to crack the silence that had buried me alive. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't love, but it was the beginning of something, and my heart, despite everything, dared to hope again. It came on a rainy evening when I least expected it. I had been curled up on my couch with a book I couldn't focus on, the sound of rain beating against the window, filling the silence that had become too familiar. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and at first I thought it was just another meaningless notification, but when I glanced at the screen, my breath caught. It was her name, just her name, stark and undeniable, glowing against the dark. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The message was short, almost cold, but it was enough to shake my entire world. Meet me tomorrow, noon, at the park. That was all she wrote, but it was enough to keep me awake the entire night, pacing the small confines of my apartment, torn between hope and fear. I arrived at the park early, my stomach twisted into knots. The sky was still heavy with clouds, the grass slick with the rain from the night before, and the air smelled of damp earth and something electric, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I stood by the old fountain at the center, every passing minute stretching longer than it should. And then she appeared. She was dressed simply in a dark coat and boots, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. Even in the gray light, she looked powerful, untouchable, and I felt small in her presence again, like I had the first night we met. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She stopped a few steps away, her eyes fixed on me, not with the fire of anger this time, but with a measured coolness, as though she was studying me, weighing whether I was worth the words she had come to speak. My chest ached with the need to break the silence, but before I could, she spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice was calm, steady, but I could hear the tremor beneath it, the unspoken pain. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. Because I was afraid, I whispered, my voice raw. Afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd shut me out before I had the chance to show you that what I feel for you is real. It started with money, yes, but it stopped being about that the moment I got to know you. I was selfish. I wanted to hold on to what we had, even if it was built on a lie. Her jaw clenched, her eyes flickering with emotions she tried to hide. Do you know how many people have used me? How many have pretended, lied, manipulated, just to take something from me? And then you. She stopped, her voice cracking for the first time. You were supposed to be different. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't look away. I am different, I said, my words desperate but honest. I made a mistake, a terrible one, but everything I've felt for you since then has been nothing but real. You make me laugh when I thought I couldn't anymore. You make me feel safe and terrified at the same time. You make me want more than I ever thought I could have. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that what I feel, it isn't a lie. The silence between us stretched again, broken only by the sound of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves in the wind. She took a step closer, her eyes searching mine as if looking for the truth buried somewhere inside me. Do you love me? She asked finally, her voice low, almost fragile. The words slipped out without hesitation, because they had been true long before I had the courage to admit them. Yes, with everything I am. I love you. Her breath caught, just barely, but I saw it. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I saw her walls crack. She closed her eyes, as if fighting an internal war. And when she opened them again, there was no anger there, only exhaustion, sorrow, and something softer hidden beneath it all. I want to believe you, she said, her voice trembling. God, I want to, but I don't know if I can. I stepped closer, my own body shaking with the weight of everything I was risking. Then let me prove it to you. Not with words, not with promises, just with time. Let me show you every day that it's not about money, not about anything you can give me. It's about you, only you. She studied me for what felt like forever, the storm in her eyes fierce and unrelenting. And then, slowly she reached out. Her hand hovered in the air, hesitant, before finally brushing against mine. The touch was tentative, fragile, but it was enough to send my heart racing. I closed my fingers around hers gently, afraid to hold on too tightly, afraid to scare her away. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke again. If you hurt me again, there won't be another chance. I won't, I promised, my voice breaking with the force of it. I swear. For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of warmth in her eyes, a small, fragile light pushing back against the shadows. She didn't smile, not fully, but the tension in her shoulders eased, and I knew something had shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't love returned in the way I craved, but it was hope, a chance, a fragile beginning again. We stood there, hand in hand, as the clouds broke above us, letting weak sunlight filter through. The world seemed to hold still, as if granting us this one moment of fragile peace. And for the first time since she had walked away, I believed we might find a way forward, not perfect, not easy, but real.